Hello and welcome to the Welsh Rugby Podcast. I'm your host, Ben James. I'm joined as ever by Steffan Thomas. We're back and with a bit more positivity in Welsh Rugby at the minute. Another decent performance on the weekend, Friday night in Dublin. Not the victory that Wales were hoping for, but certainly I don't think anyone went to Ireland expecting victory, but they certainly came pretty close. 27-17 the final score in Dublin. Steph, I mean, another improved performance by Steve Tandy's side. A decent trajectory we seem to be heading on at the minute.
Yeah, I think the performances of the last two test matches have been night and day in comparison to what we witnessed against England and France. For me, the biggest thing is the three biggest things: set piece. We spoke about how poor that was against England, especially, but it's been very good against both Scotland, apart from the final scrum against Scotland, obviously, and Ireland. I think that's an area where Wales have fixed. Dewi deserves a lot of credit as well for how accurate his throwing into the line out has been, because I know I personally have questioned him over that, but I think he's been outstanding recently. I think just physicality has been just 10 times better than it has been over the past 18 months, pre-game. I was one of these, a lot of the journalists speaking in the media centre were saying, can't really see Wales living with Ireland's physicality, but they did that, and they were on top for large periods of the game, actually. So that was a big tick in the box, and defensively as well, they've really kicked on. They seem to employ the blitz defence on Friday night, and they soaked up a lot of pressure from Ireland. And I think those are the three areas they've really improved on, and that's allowed them to be a lot more competitive. So certainly they're on an upward trajectory, but international rugby is about winning, and I think they, to actually say that they progressed, they do need to finish the championship with a win.
Yeah, and obviously there is one more game to come in the tournament against Italy, which, along with the Scotland game at home, I guess was always the one we were sort of targeting. You did fear coming into this tournament that even if Italy was the best chance Wales had of winning, you didn't know what state they were going to head into coming into this game, given the start they had, England and France, which turned out, as we sort of feared, to be heavy defeats. We've seen it in campaigns. Remember last year that their worst performance came against England in the final round, the autumn, obviously South Africa with extenuating circumstances given the amount of players unavailable to Wales. But there's been a tendency that they run out of steam in performances. Certainly, the second Gatland stint was almost the complete opposite of his mantra of "we get better the longer we go together." They got worse under Gatland in campaign, so that's what we sort of feared. But we're actually heading into this Italy match now with a couple of decent performances to build off, and Italy are still favourites. They've just beaten England for the first time. They're looking to win 3 games in the tournament for the first time. Understandably, they're favourites, but it wouldn't be a shock if Wales won, would it?
No, I don't think it would be. I mean, obviously, from an Italian point of view, their challenge is refocusing after hitting maybe the biggest high in their rugby history. You could see the emotion after the final whistle had gone. They'd given everything to the cause, and they finally got their just reward. So it's going to be interesting to see if they can sort of replicate that against Wales, because when you've got a few teams there's not that much between them, and if you look at Wales' performances against Scotland and Ireland, especially physicality, defense, and set piece, as I said earlier, you've got to have those three areas. Have got to be strong against Italy, and if you can do that, then you've got a chance, haven't you? So if Wales can replicate that performance, it'll be interesting because perhaps Wales, you could argue, need a victory a bit more than Italy, and obviously they're playing at home as well. So it will be interesting. But what impressed me about Italy, right, is you could argue that their actual performance against England wasn't as good maybe as what they played against Scotland and certainly against Ireland. They maybe weren't at their best against England. The scrum wasn't as strong because obviously Ellis Genge did well, and they maybe wasted a few chances, but they stuck in that arm wrestle. In the past, they would have fallen away, and obviously they got a world-class centre in Menoncello as well. So Italy's a different beast. This is an Italian side that can soak up pressure and can turn it around when they're behind. They can come back into the game. Garbisi has been so underrated for them. I think he's been outstanding. So that game management is there as well. But from a Welsh perspective, if their set piece defence and physicality is as strong as it was, and they cut out some silly mistakes which are still in their game against Ireland, then I think they do stand a chance of winning on the weekend.
And obviously, that result came as a part of maybe one of the best weekends in Championship history. Also, you had Wales pushing Ireland in Dublin, the Italy result, as we say, and then Scotland taking apart France at Murrayfield. I know the final score was 50-40, but they decimated them in that third quarter, like really took them apart. Playing a sort of very French brand of rugby, lots of offloads, kept sort of moving the point of contact and just were superb, and it sets everything up really nicely for the final weekend. But getting back to Wales on Friday night, you mentioned the defence. I think we're starting to see a Steve Tandy defence now, aren't we? You sort of, I don't think it was an outright blitz on Friday. I think it was more aggressive than we've seen from a Steve Tandy defence in this tournament, but it wasn't quite as all or nothing as a blitz. It was still very connected, sort of pressing past the ball. They just did not go at the breakdown at all. I think there was 90-something% of rucks just had one Welshman in it. Some just no compete. Just let Ireland sort of play in front of them. Really, really strong defensive work. And obviously, the man who's made the headlines is Alex Mann, 32, 33 tackles, depending on what statistic provider you use, because these things always seem to change. But he was everywhere. There was the intercept on his line. I think the last two games, only Thomas Williams, Sam Costello, and Dan Edwards have made more passes than Alex Mann. It just goes to show how Wales are using him, not just in defence, but in attack. He's been superb. After probably a relatively muted start to the tournament, I think he played 40 minutes, didn't he, at Twickenham. Probably didn't get himself into the game as much as he'd like against France. There's a lot of questions about his size and about what he can do at test level, but he certainly answered them in the last two games.
Yeah, he hasn't. I was one of those that wasn't quite convinced that he was big enough to make an impact at this level, but I think he's put those sort of doubts to bed, especially against Ireland. He was just into everything, wasn't he? I mean, that tackle stat is just phenomenal, and there was the tip on passes, from the point of contact, which was very influential as well. So yeah, he put in a great performance. I thought James Botham was excellent as well. He was just everywhere. He was strong. I know they didn't go after the breakdown that much, but he was strong at the ruck in general. He carried well. I just thought that the whole back row as a unit went really well, and I think another guy who's really come into his own has been Ben Carter as well. He's another one that, myself included, were a bit, is he quite international class? But I think he's answered a lot of questions as well over the past fortnight. And, we all saw what Rhys Carre did, superb bit of skill. And Steve Tandy said in a post-match press conference that they actually feel that they've only just scratched the surface with Carre's potential. They feel that he can go up another few levels as well, which is exciting. I think Nicky Smith has been an unsung hero as well. I think he's done a lot off the bench. And Thomas Francis has locked up the scrum. So from a forward perspective, it's been a big step in the right direction over the past couple of test matches.
Yeah, we'll get onto the Rhys Carre try in a bit, because that deserves to be talked about in its own merit. But you mentioned Ben Carter there. Obviously, he's calling the line out now, and the line outs look pretty solid the last two matches. I think it was 100% against Scotland. I don't know if it wasn't quite that against Ireland, but he's doing a good job of calling it. Alex Mann, as we sort of mentioned, he's been a big target there. But there's a stat that Ross Petty tweeted, and it's the best rate of combined carries, tackles, attacking rucks, and defensive rucks hit. Xander Fakeson is top of the charts, making a contribution in those metrics every 66 seconds. But Ben Carter is second with 70, then Dab Jenkins, then Thomas Francis. So, okay, Mann's getting the credit for the tackles. Aaron Wainwright obviously is Wales' best ball carrier. Even with the sort of, the knock he had last week, you saw how important he was. Ollie Cracknell came on and got through a hell of a lot of carries. I think if you break it down carry per minute, he was certainly up there for his time on the field. Obviously, James Botham, you mentioned the turnovers. Dewi Lake, Rhys Carre, big moments from those guys. But then you're sort of your core of your pack, your tight head who's not getting the plaudits, and your two locks, just the work they're getting through. Ben Carter's going to end this tournament as one of Wales's first choice locks. And that's testament to how good he's been, because there's probably been question marks about Ben Carter and his ability to step up to test level. Even speaking to people who sort of follow the Dragons closely and cover them, they know how good he is and what he can do there at Rodney Parade. But it's always been that next step of test rugby, taking it. He's what this is. Don't think is he double figures starts at the minute? I think this might be his 10th start if he starts this weekend, and it'd be only the second time he started 3 games in a row for Wales. The first time was his debut back in 2021. So he's always been on the fringes. But it's just so good to have someone sort of coming through to really put competition on. Obviously, Adam Beard has been a mainstay. So having someone like Ben Carter come through is huge, because 3-4 weeks ago we were literally having this conversation saying who's putting the pressure on Adam Beard, and now we know it's Ben Carter. But yeah, as you say, obviously Rhys Carre, just what a moment. It's funny because Ireland did a good job of stopping him about 3-4 meters out from that tap penalty that Wales have employed throughout this tournament, and then he goes and does that, runs it in from 25 meters, and really got Wales back into the game with that, because they were looking like they were going to go in 12-3 down and having no rewards for the amount of red zone pressure they'd had in that first half. Just a brilliant piece of play by the prop. And then it's testament, isn't it, to what Steve Tandy's doing, that he's getting the best out of players that have been overlooked. We've had 2 Wales coaches who didn't want anything to do with Rhys Carre because of his fitness. Warren Gatland literally gave up with him. And how many times have we said that we're not in a position to really afford to give up on players? Steve Tandy's brought him back in. Obviously, Matt Sherritt's a coach who literally draws up plays for guys like Rhys Carre. He did it at Cardiff. The amount of times Rhys Carre scored from point-blank range, from tap penalties, from line-outs. It's got Sherritt's fingerprints all over it. Danny Wilson's a very good coach in terms of 22 sort of red zone work around the forwards. They're making the most out of him, and they're using him for what he can do and not focusing on what he can't do. And I think that's a big thing with this Steve Tandy environment right now.
Yeah, and I think they have to be like that, don't they? They have to have their attitude, because they haven't got the luxury, they haven't got the depth of to be that as ruthless as some other tier 1 nations. But I think from the moment, from Rhys Carre's time playing for Wales under 20s all the way back 8 or so years ago, he was somebody who he's somebody who can charge up the middle. There could be 3 defenders on him and he could still break through, make real, it's a buzzword these days, but make those post-contact meters. And he's got an offloading game. He's a really talented player, and he's got proper size as well. But, Tandy's come in and as you said, he said, right, we know you may not be the fittest prop in the world, although we work on it. But for 40 minutes, 45 minutes, I want you to absolutely get over the gain line, just smash into the opposition. We'll work in the scrummaging, but he's really just given Carre, I think, that confidence just to back himself and just to do what he's good at. And that for people who have watched Carre play throughout his whole career, that try wasn't that much of a shock. We know he's capable of things like that. Okay, this is Test rugby, it's a different level to URC or the Prem, but he's always been a player that can have X factor moments. And I agree with Tandy. I actually think that there's a lot more to come from him as well. I mentioned it earlier, but I also like that balance between Carre and Nicky Smith. I've seen a lot of people tweet, but it's not great. He could only last 45 minutes. But Nicky Smith has also contributed a lot of the last two games. He brings something different to Carre. He's a more destructive scrummager. Gave Furlong a real torrid time, I thought. And he offers a lot on the park as well. So I think that balance that Luke said is really strong. So yeah, that's certainly a weapon that the Wales can use moving forward towards the World Cup.
I mean, the long and short of it is they're both loose-head props that you'd want playing 60, 70 minutes. That's that's the crux of it, and that's a good position to be in. You can talk about whether you're taking off Rhys Carre too soon, but when you're bringing on Nicky Smith and the breakdown work he does, the scrummaging, just everything he offers, he has every right to be starting in many ways. So it's a good position to be in. I guess before we get on to how Wales turn these positive performances into wins, we've spoken a lot about the pack and the work they did. Obviously, the back line, it wasn't really a night for them, was it? I don't think the attack was as bad as people are making out. I think it was one of those nights. I think both teams were probably stifled a bit, went a bit one out. Defences certainly got on top. But we're seeing, Eddie James has made the 13 jersey his own. Is there still question marks about whether Joe Hawkins is the right partner for him? Is Lewis Rees-Zammit the best option at fullback? Do they make changes on the wing? What are we getting towards the right balance in the back line? Because certainly Eddie James has been a revelation in this tournament in terms of consider he hasn't. I don't think he's played 10 matches at 13 at senior level. He only started for the first time in his position this season, and now look at him. He's making defensive reads. Sort of spot blitzing, Gary Ringrose on the edge, sort of stop Irish attacks dead in their tracks. Like, he's come on leaps and bounds.
Yeah, he has. He's been excellent. Our columnist Jonathan Jiffy Davis has said the last few columns he still isn't quite. He doesn't quite think that the balance is right in midfield. They haven't played badly at all, but he feels, and I know a lot of people would agree with him. He feels that Eddie James is better suited to 12. I know that's not the game plan that Matt Sherrod wants to adopt, but there's still that question for me: is Eddie James better suited to inside centre, where he can be used as a target, to get over the gain line a bit better and target the 10 and whatnot. So there's still that question mark. So I think moving forward, obviously towards the summer, they've got to look at that. I think in terms of the backs in general, like, do you think that the Wales' wingers offer enough of a threat at the moment? Like, we've got like a bunch of 5 or 6 wings in Wales, and they're a similar level, and that's created, they're excellent club players, and that's created a lot of competition for places, like your Ellis Mees, your Rogers, and that he's not in the squad, but obviously Rhea Dyer and Kieran Giles and players like that. But in terms of like Josh Adams, he's been solid, right? Although he did butcher that pass to both of them, which should have ended in a try in the second half. But uh, do me and Adams offer enough X factor, enough of a cutting edge out wide? Do Wales need to mix up the back three a little bit? Maybe bring Rodgers in at full back, move Ellis Mead full back, maybe, and put Zammit back on the wing. I mean, what's your thoughts on that back three? Because that's an area I'm not that sort of impressed with.
I mean, on the Josh Adams chance, I think that's, I don't know if that's just not confidence, but I think that's an element of him trying to do what he thinks is the right thing. I think Josh Adams 5 years ago doesn't give that pass because he didn't need to give the pass. Really, he's just got to head down and try to score himself. And if he's short, then you recycle. But I think he's been all right. I think he's been quietly solid in this tournament. Josh Adams obviously scored 2 tries. There's an element that I think in a Wales, in a Matt Sherratt attack, when it's working, you're gonna get opportunities on the edges. It's a very rugby league inspired sort of attack, and you really see that in terms of where the tries are coming from. You think of rugby league and almost as it should be in rugby, the wingers are getting most of the tries, but that doesn't always happen to be the case in union because you tend to get, back rowers and all, sort of on the edges. But with a sort of a share it attack, you're getting a lot of tries, as we saw Josh Adams against Scotland, Josh Adams against England, where you're creating those opportunities in the wide channels for your wingers. So I think he's been solid. I honestly think I don't know, this, for whatever reason, Wales's wings haven't really gotten to the tournament. I think Rhys Carre is what, 43 carries from fullback. Obviously, a lot of those kick receipts, not ideal ball for him. Making a lot of meters, easy meters, I should say. He's second in terms of meters made in this tournament. But a lot of that is, I guess, yeah, empty meters in terms of running kicks back and then getting to the chase. But he's been on the ball 43 times for Wales. Whether that's quality touches, probably not. I think he's making more meters per carry back in the autumn when he's on the wing. But conversely, 5 people have played on the wing for Wales at some point or another in this tournament. Adams, Ellis Mead, Gabe Hamer-Webb, Blair Murray, and Mason Grady. They've had 42 carries between them. So just Wales at the minute aren't getting their wingers on the ball. So I don't know. I think if Rhys Carre was on the wing, he'd have less touches, but he'd have more quality touches. And if it's anything like the Japan game back in the autumn, he'd have more. They'd just make sure he had touches because they were just flinging the ball to him whenever they could in that game. But I don't know. I just, part of me thinks if you think Rhys Carre is your long-term option at fullback, then you gotta persevere with him. And in terms of the wings, what do we want them to be? Do we want them to be running threats, considering that what we're doing in sort of attack right now is making the most out of our ball carriers, Derry Lake, Rhys Carre, Eddie James, and then we want our wings on the edges to finish it? Or do we want them to be sort of the aerial threats, going, when we kick to compete, getting those loose balls, making a mess of things, giving crumbs for guys like Dow Jenkins or Jim Botham. So it's not simple. For me, I don't know. There's no one I really look at and think they're going to come in and make a massive difference. I think if you put Rhys Carre on the wing, it would probably help him, but it helps him in the short term. Like he'd probably play on the wing on Saturday and he'd probably score. He scored 2 in the autumn in the 2 games he started on the wing against Japan and New Zealand. So you put him on the wing against Italy, yeah, he probably scores. But does it help him long term if you really think he is the option at fullback? You look at the fullbacks in this squad. Cam Winner's not there. Jacob Beatham's not there. Blair Murray, they're not convinced he's a fullback. Are they, based on what they saw in the autumn? Who else is there? I mean, literally, the next name off my head is genuinely Angus O'Brien, who I think has had conversations. And there's been conversations in camp, hasn't there, before the Six Nations because of the way he's playing for the Dragons, but he's probably not the long-term solution as he's 32. Yestin Hopkins at the Ospreys is very good under the high ball. But is he test quality? We don't know. Otherwise, yeah, I don't know who the obvious option at fullback is. It's probably one of those Cardiff players that I've mentioned, but do they see that being Cam Winnett? Do they see it being Jacob Beetham? I don't know. So I think they've probably got to stick with Rhys Carre and, unless you see Ellis Mee or Tom Rogers, but then neither of them really start at fullback. I mean, Ellis Mee does occasionally, but Tom Rogers has made himself a wing now, hasn't he? I know he's a fullback by trade, and that's how he saw himself, but he's a wing now, and I think it would. I just don't see Wales changing things at the minute. Even though there's an argument they maybe could and should. I think Tandy's starting to get some consistency in selection, and he's starting to get an identity of this team. I think it's probably good for him that he doesn't need to then rip everything up all at once again and sort of start afresh. I think he's just got to persevere with this.
Yeah. The other selection, obviously, potential change would be outside half. Dan Edwards didn't have the best start to the game, and he missed tackle on Stockdale, and there was a couple of wayward kicks, but he improved as the game went on and had a tidy game on the whole. But if Costello is fit, and we'll obviously have an answer to that later on, then the best performance by Welsh 10 this championship has been Costello against Scotland. I mean, assuming he's fit, would you stick or twist a 10?
I mean, by the time this podcast goes out, we'll probably know the answer to whether he's fit or not. But I would say that the fact that they've kept him in camp, knowing he was only likely going to be fit for this one, if at all, tells you everything. If he's fit, they'll start Sam Costello. And he played very well against Scotland. That's his best performance in 20 caps by a country mile. You think he started one game last year and didn't. It probably looked like he'd fallen off the test sort of front a little bit in terms of his confidence and the way he was playing, but he's come back really well, and he ran the show against Scotland. And yeah, if he's fit, then yeah, he'll start. There's but it's if he isn't, then yeah, it's down to Dan Edwards again. And as you say, he got better as he went on, and I think he'll have learned things from that game. It's the little moments, I think, more than anything. I think defensively, all right, he misses tackles, but 10s are always going to be targeted in that. You can hide your 10. It's the little moments. It's that sort of kick on 65 minutes where he's put it up cross field, even though Wales have no chasers on the right hand side. So then the crumb's gone to Joe McCarthy and Ireland, get the field position and score from the line out. They're the sort of the little things he needs to learn at this level. The whole team need to learn, really, because if they are going to start turning these performances into results, it's a nail in those moments. And we've seen it with Italy. How long have Italy been putting in performances probably where like Wales have for the last 2 weeks? For a long time now, really. I know they went through God knows how many games it was, losing in the Six Nations, but there was a lot of performances like the last two from Wales where they're in the hunt. They're working really hard to stay in the game, and they do it. But they're not really going to take that next step. And that's down to these little moments, and that's what Wales have to nail starting on Saturday. Which I guess leads us on to the final question. Will they do that? Are they going to win?
I'm going to say yes. I just think that Italy are okay. They are better team than Wales at the moment, but as I said earlier, I think it is a challenge for them coming back down to earth against Wales after that phenomenal high against England, and I just feel that Wales will want this victory a little bit more, and Wales will also feel they have a bit of momentum behind them after the performance against Ireland, and if they can match the Ireland pack physically, I think they can do the same for Italy. So I think it'll be close, but I'm going to back Wales to win at last on Saturday.
Well, there we go. 4 years in the making, a home Six Nations victory awaits. That is it for this week's podcast. If you have enjoyed, make sure to subscribe, leave a review. It really does help us out. But until the next one, goodbye.